Hello beer tubers and welcome to another beer review with me, Peter, the master of hops. Today checking out some Danish craft beer. It's been a while since we did an IPA from Denmark, but we're doing one because it's a West Coast IPA that I randomly found at my local supermarket. I was like, what? Nice. And it was somewhat fresh. Because often with supermarkets, you don't see beers being that fresh. But with Menu, they really started to carry a lot of awesome Danish craft beer, which is really cool. And they got a lot of Alefarm, and one of them was this, Deadwood. At only around 2 months of age, that's pretty good for supermarket standards, I think. And this is a West Coast double IPA. That's also why I wanted to check it out. And as you can see, it looks like it's going to be the old school style. Also judging by the hops, with a nice big sequoia tree on the label. And I really dig the new label scheme they've done at Alefarm. It's really cool. So West Coast double IPA, 8% hopped with Simcoe, Columbus, Nugget, CGX, and Chinook hops. So really, really old school West Coast IPA. New kind of thing for them. I think they've done mostly hazy IPAs. They've done some West Coast. They've actually done a lot of different things, but they're known for the hazies. I think they've maybe dropped a West Coast IPA once in a while, and yeah, they've also done stouts and whatnot. They recently released some barrel aged stouts, which people really loved, which I didn't get to try, but this one will be nice, I'm hoping. So yeah. Somewhat fresh, old school West Coast IPA. I mean, I'm all about West Coast these days. I'm sick of haze, so I'm hoping this will be up my jam, or up my alley, or be my jam. But here we go. So, man, look at that. That looks like Sierra Nevada or Torpedo, or these kind of. That's also Sierra Nevada beer, Sierra Nevada Pale Ale, Sierra Nevada Torpedo, Sierra Nevada. Celebration, or something like a Green Flash West Coast IPA, like a lot of the old school American West Coast IPAs where there's a good amount of crystal malt or something of the sort in there to give this dark orange color. Like it looks even darker on camera, but it's really dark orange with a white head and a nice decent clarity streaming carbonation. Let's check out the aroma on this one. Really old school. Really, 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 really old school. And it reminds me of drinking an IPA from the States like 10 years ago, maybe even more, 12 years ago. So the thing is, the reason why I'm much more into the modern style is because the use of crystal malts, it gives a unique aroma. I agree with that. But it also really helps force in a flavor profile of oxidized hops real quick, and it reminds me of like old black tea. And I talked about this all the time in IPAs back in the day, which is basically a crystal malt and hop combination, I think, where you get that like slightly sweet kind of crystal malt flavor and hop flavor, and then because there's the oxygenation of crystal malts, you get a slight oxygenation. You get this like tea leafy black tea thing often. It could also just be, of course, some of the hops chosen in there that gives that. But if you use Chinook, for example, or Columbus on a lean malt backbone and whatnot, and use it late and whatnot, you get really cool fruit flavors. It's not like all this resiny pine, but this is what it is aiming to be. This is wanting to be an old school West Coast, and it certainly nailed that. It really reminds me of getting like Green Flash West Coast IPA back in the day, being a few months old and being like, whoa, shit, man, this is so fresh. And then we got it I think, yeah, we got Green Flash West Coast IPA at one point at like 2 months, which was crazy for America back then. But yeah, it's like black tea. It's not like bursting out of the glass, but it's also 2 months. There's a little bit of an apricot jam, orange jam, soft touches of caramel, pine, resin. It smells like, yeah, pretty dead on for some old school stuff. Not half bad. Not half bad, but not my like preferred style of West Coast IPA personally. But it smells good. Let's try it. Cheers. Yeah, really old school. Really bitter. It's much nicer tasting. It's not as heavy on tea leaf kind of hoppy flavor on the palate. It's more like really bitter grapefruit and grapefruit pith and huge like bitter pine tree sap type flavors. Like it's not much of bright fruit. It's like all these really resiny, intense, like bitter hop flavors. And I think that's why a lot of people don't like West Coast IPAs, is because this is what they are thinking of when they think of West Coast IPAs. This really, yeah, it tastes like a beer that was brewed a long time ago. Like I liked these back in the day, but the West Coast IPAs I always preferred were the ones that had more fruitiness. Like when I raved about beers, it was like Ruination and Sculpin, for example, or some of these beers. I like the more fruity ones. Like I've always the stuff from from Alpine, like all these more hop focused IPAs. That's not saying that this is a bad West Coast IPA in any shape or form. It's just like really, really old school, the oldest of old school, almost. Yeah, a torpedo. I mean, it's similar to something like that as well. Just this is a double IPA. But it's really nicely dry, which I like. It has like that slight caramelized sweet malty thing with like big pine, big resin, tree sap, grapefruit pith, grapefruit zest. Yeah, earthiness as well. A little bit of that black tea. The fruitiness that's mainly there is that like slightly grapefruity, orangey, maybe jammy, apricot-y thing, but mostly it's like really earthy, resiny. Like if you're not a fan of bitter beer, you will also not like this because this is quite bitter. It feels fairly bitter, but I like bitter beer. So, but it falls into that category of IPA back in the day where West Coast IPAs aim to be the most bitter. And I also think like there is a threshold, like because if you get too bitter, the bitterness overshadows all the fruit flavor. Then all you get is bitterness. Balance in beer is quite different from style to style, where the balance lies. For example, even like in pastry stouts, there's a different kind of balance. Of course, there's a different kind of balance in Pilsner, in Helleslager, in West Coast IPA. Like it depends on what you're really trying to make. But it reminds me of beers back then that were somewhat on the extreme spectrum, in both in terms of bitterness, at least. But it's really good. I think it would be even more banging and fresher. But I'm not like super fired up about it. I much prefer the more modern approach these days, where you get more hop flavor and fruit flavor and very clean beers, and also just like that scraping, big caramelized like crystal malt, big scraping bitterness and caramelized like crystal malt flavor and like earthy resin, like these really as like almost harsh flavors to some extent that West Coast IPAs were known for back in the day. I've stepped a little bit away from it. I still like it a lot. Like it sounds like I'm really knocking it. I think it's actually a really good old school West Coast IPA, and it really nails that. But it's like for preference, I just prefer the more fruity stuff. But I'm still gonna go 90. I actually think this is really good. This is definitely a 4 on Untapped for sure. Especially if you think old school, then this is totally well done and nailed. Yeah, that was really fun. A trip down memory lane from a Danish brewery. So if you guys had a chance to try Alefarm Deadwood, let me know what you thought of it. You can get it in menu stores around the country in Denmark. So head down to your local menu and see if they got some, because I think they've made a deal with menu Alefarm, so they get a lot of distribution through those stores, I think. So check them out. If you guys already had this one, let me know what you thought of it. As always, remember to comment, subscribe, check out the Facebook fan page and Twitter and Instagram, and give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Ring the bell for future notifications about videos. And I'm going to say cheers and see you guys in another beer review.